Hello and welcome to The Price of Time, the show where we explore the defining moments that made people who they are today and the impact of those moments over time. Here's your host, Luke Tatum. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Price of Time. I'm your host, Luke Tatum, and today's guest is Jason Tuttle. Jason is a married stay-at-home dad of two special needs children with multiple disabilities, some of which are quite rare. He is also the founder of Letters to Zachary, a grief blog and support group that he is going to tell us more about as the episode unfolds. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to get into this. It's kind of a heavy topic, but I know that we're going to just navigate it as best we can. And I don't know all the details. We've had a brief chat just so the viewers, listeners know. We've talked a little before this, but I really don't know the whole story, and we're going to uncover that kind of as we talk. So the way that we start this show, Jason, we're going to just start with what is your big kind of defining moment? The price of time, right? We're all about kind of how things unfold after a big decision or a big moment. So if you would just kind of tell me what is your big thing that we're going to hone in on today?
My big thing is just life dealing with a lot of adversity. And when I say adversity, I don't necessarily always mean it as a bad thing. I just mean dealing with life challenges as they come, almost like hurdles on a track and field.
Okay. And so you've had some struggles of a particular kind, though, right?
Certainly.
You've been dealing with some things, and that's kind of what led to this Letters to Zachary group.
Certainly.
I'm just going to call it group. And so, if you'll tell me kind of maybe what that's about, just in general terms, quick description, and then we're going to kind of look at life before, life after, kind of what's kind of created that.
Certainly. Letters to Zachary is kind of the evolution I have come from the day that my son passed away. Ultimately, around the time that my son passed away, I was seeing a therapist or counselor, if you will, and her way of helping me deal with the emotions relating to grief was, have you ever thought about journaling? And so it kind of morphed from journaling to as a personal thing to one day I shared it, and I got a really nice, great, large response to it, to where I started sharing it more and more, and it just kind of evolved into a page to where now I'm getting upwards of about 1,000 followers in about the first 7 months.
Wow. So it's still a relatively recent thing that you've been doing this. So about 7 months. Did you start doing the journaling right after he passed, or
not necessarily right after he passed. It was probably maybe closer to that. The more I think about it, it was probably about a month after he passed, and I started getting into it. But the actual posting it for other people to see, it was several months.
Okay. And so I guess, if you would kind of walk me up to this point, it sounds, just based on our conversation before, it sounds like this wasn't necessarily a sudden surprise. Your kids have been dealing with things. Your kids are dealing with things, right? And so what's that kind of situation, if you don't mind?
Well, just to give a little bit of a backstory, both of my kids were born with several mental and physical disabilities. The rundown, both of my kids were nonverbal. They're both epileptic. They both experience seizures. They are both considered severely neurologically delayed, meaning despite their age in their teenage years, they functioned about 4 to 6 years old. As far as we know to this point, I don't know if they'll ever get out of that 4 to 6 year old range. They might get a little ahead of it, but to make that gap up at this point, I don't think that'll ever happen. My son, on the other hand, had another issue outside of what my daughter did, which was a rare condition. It was a gastrointestinal issue that even to this day, they don't officially know the actual cause of it. They know characteristics of it, and they know physical attributes to it, but they don't know where the beginning is at this point.
Wow. So it's something that doesn't even have like a name. Is that
It
correct?
well, it does. It's the clinical name is Eagle Barrett syndrome, but it's more affectionately known as prune belly. And I'll give the easiest for your listeners, the easiest description of it. It's related to a kidney issue. Typically, kids that have Eagle Barrett syndrome are either are only born with one kidney, which that's what my son was born with just one kidney. And if they're born with one kidney, typically they have a lot of kidney issues, like to the point of needing a transplant. I was, at least on that end, I was fortunate. My son never had to have a transplant. On top of the kidney issue, they are born with abnormally large bladders, which means they can get a lot more fluid in there, and a lot of them have to be given a catheter at least early on to help them drain the bladder. They just don't necessarily always get that sensation to go like a normal adult would. Uh, and if the bladder is not fully drained, it can be susceptible to urinary tract infections and those kind of issues related to that. Um, I'm not sure about all Eagle Barrett syndrome children, but my son, well, all Eagle Barrett syndrome children are typically born without abdominal muscles. There's no core muscle there. So what that meant for my son, at least the issues that he dealt with, was he had normal lungs, but he had kind of a diminished lung capacity, meaning he couldn't take that real full deep breath. And so, like, anytime we would get like a respiratory related virus where you and I could like get that force to cough things out, because he doesn't have kind of that middle section wall that can almost like to press up against it to force it out to get that pressure in there, he didn't have. So, at least early on in the beginning, if I didn't catch it fast enough, we were almost assuredly admitted into the hospital. And then even after that, when I had all the machinery in my house, if I didn't catch it fast enough and do all the machinery and the protocol to try to get him better, we were ultimately in the hospital. And we were almost, outside of the first couple of times, we were almost assuredly in one of the ICUs because they had the machinery there to be able to take care of them. And so that kind of encompasses all of the Eagle Barrett syndrome unto itself. And that's completely different from any of his other issues. It's not related to anything.
Okay. Okay. Now, how quickly did you know that this was going on? I mean, did you have a diagnosis in hand fairly early on? I believe you said that they both kids were born with issues.
My son, we didn't know. We
Really?
had no
Okay.
reason to believe that he had any. In fact, we even got to that week 20 appointment, which is typically the appointment you find out the sex of the child.
Sure.
And it was during that appointment, my wife and I kind of played back and forth on, she didn't want to know. I did want to know just because I'm a planner and I was making the
Yeah.
nursery, and
Yeah.
I just didn't want to paint yellows and browns and that kind of stuff.
Right. Right.
And so we playfully went back and forth, and it was actually the ultrasound tech who, in hindsight, probably shouldn't have said anything. It's like the doctor, but she goes, "We're at the point where I need to find out the sex of the child. Do you want to know?" And we went back and forth, and she said, "Well, I need to know I found an issue." She probably should have never said that, but she did. And we go, "We want to know the sex of the child. What's going on?" And she said, "Well, you're having a boy." And I said, "Can you tell us what the issue is?" And she says, "No." She said, "The reason why I need to know the sex of the child is because it's rare in boys, but it's even rarer in girls. It's, as we later found out, prune belly happens in about 97% male and it's 3% female. And so that was the reason why she wanted to know the sex of the child. We didn't officially get the Eagle Barrett syndrome, prune belly syndrome diagnosis until the day he was born. Literally, he was born. He went up to the NICU at the hospital we were at, and it was the doctor that said, "Your son was born with Eagle Barrett syndrome." And I literally went, "Wait, what? And what's that?" And it was the next day he got transported up to the Children's Hospital on the north side of Atlanta. And he spent the next, I think, either 10 or 11 days in the NICU there before he actually came home.
Wow. Wow. And so you mentioned some protocols and different things, and you don't have to describe in detail, all those things, but you dealt with this for a number of years. And so how long? I mean, how old was he? And if you don't mind.
We were in and out of the hospital probably every 6 months for the first 5 years of his life. Um, it was, I don't remember the year, but it was one of the years we were watching the ball drop for New Year's Eve on TV. He was going to sleep we were in a normal floor room in the hospital. And like when you and I are sick and we go to sleep, we have kind of that reserve of oxygen that we kind of rely on as we're asleep. Well, what we found out really quickly was when he was going to sleep, when he was sick with this and not having the stomach muscles and all that stuff to help, like his oxygen was tanking, like it was dropping to like 70%. It was something ridiculously low, like almost turning blue. And so it was at that point that we got a pulmonologist and we got moved up to one of the ICUs. So I won't go. Essentially, I got four machines. I got a machine that beat it on him to loosen it up. I got a machine to blow air and suck it up his esophagus. I got another machine to suction it out of his esophagus. And then I got another machine that, like a nebulizer, to give him a breathing treatment. And that was my protocol every time I heard something.
Wow, wow. Well, so let's fast forward, I guess, more to the present. I mean, you obviously that's something that most people, have no ability to comprehend, right? And all of that you've been dealing with, and in and out of the hospital, and I mean, it's a horrible situation. But at least he was there with you, and you were, able to take care of him to the best that you knew how to do, and all of those things. And so, but eventually, he, he's no longer with us today, right? And so, what and I know this is a tough thing, and you don't have to answer anything you don't want to answer, but like, if you can tell us, just, I mean, what was that like, and kind of what did Letters to Zachary become, from the future. So I just want to shift, to the recent past and then to the future, kind of what you've been doing since then.
Well, you had mentioned his passing. As a special needs parent, when you have a child with, my kids were considered chronic illnesses. It wasn't necessarily terminal illnesses. And so I, I never thought one of their illnesses would eventually lead to where it led for my son, but it was always kind of something in the back of my mind. I always live this life of, if I expect the worst, prepare for the best. Excuse me, expect the best, prepare for the worst, and I'm not surprised. And so that was only back there just in case something went south, never thinking it would ever come to reality. And so the issue that happened with him was sudden and unexpected. From the day that it started to the day he was actually pronounced was about 36 hours. That sounds like a lot of time, but in reality, it's not.
No, sure, sure. You're running on all cylinders. I mean, I would assume through that entire time, it's not, time passage is not the same during a crisis. It doesn't feel like that time.
Honestly, I didn't start going on all cylinders till that morning, because at least from my medical knowledge of his issues, everything was kind of on par of what I'd seen before up until that morning. Now, granted, in hindsight, looking back, some of the symptoms that I saw were actually out of the norm. It wasn't something that I would have looked for, because it wasn't under his normal umbrella of issues. And so, honestly, the morning that I actually drove him up to the hospital, it was a gut reaction. It really was. It was, something's not right. In fact, in years previous, there were several times doctors told me that I brought him in the precise moment that an illness was forming, and they don't know how I did it. And I said, I don't know how I did it either. It was
Wow,
just,
wow.
there was a sound that I heard. I went, this is not good. You need to go to the hospital. And we were off. And so on the day that he passed away, that morning, there were just some physical symptoms that I was just like, I've never felt this before. I don't know what's going on. I'm taking them up. And honestly, my thought in my head taking them up was, worst comes to worst, we'll get admitted. We'll be here for a couple of days like we always were. We'll get sent home with medication. He'll be fine in a week or so, is honestly my thought until about 3 or 4 miles before the hospital when I start seeing things go south.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Wow. And so, I mean, I guess in the wake of that, you start seeing the counselor after some time passes, and you start to diary journal, and you start to kind of work through this. And I would say writing, I mean, is an amazing thing to do to navigate your own uh, emotions. I mean, not just for grief, but for all kinds of things. I behind me on this shelf somewhere. I don't see it in the frame, but there's a freedom journal back there, which is a podcaster designed this journal to kind of set a goal and work through it. And so I use that to some extent in writing my book, for example. So it's not that it's exclusively useful for grief, but it's certainly useful for grief and for other things. And so um, that you mentioned you doing that, you're journaling, and then you decided to share it. Was there a particular moment that led to that? Was it a suggestion from your counselor, or did you just say maybe I should post this?
No, well, it wasn't really a suggestion from anybody. I'm a researcher, so when any medical issues came up, I'd get on social media to see if I could find like a group of people that had something similar. And so after I had the initial kind of wear off of the shock of everything, I got on Facebook to see if I could find grief groups. And I actually found one that was specific enough for the loss of a special needs child. And it was a small, a lot of grief groups are large groups. This was kind of a smaller group. And so I got in this group and I got to know the admin there really well. And the most groups on Facebook or anywhere on social media is typically 95 to 97% women, and it's a small percentage of men. And of that small percentage, a very small are kind of regular on there. And so I would get in there and I would pretty regularly make comments and posts. And I was kind of the unicorn, if you will, as a man sharing emotion. Uh, I typically got a lot of response. And so after enough time and kind of feeling comfortable in there, I asked the admin, I said, do you mind if I post one of my journal entries? And she's just like, no, we'd love for you to have, because we don't typically have a whole lot of men that do that. And so that's kind of where it led. And if I hadn't got, if I didn't get the response that I got, it probably would have ended there. We may not even be talking, just because I might have thought, well, it wasn't real received, that kind of thing. This is for me. It's personal. Okay, I get it. Well, I immediately got a response. And I mean, I'll never forget it. The first woman that ever commented said, you're the first person. Now, how'd she go? She goes, I have never told anybody how I truly feel, and you are the first person, and I've never met you that has explained exactly how I feel word for word. And I went, well, I appreciate it. It's inspired by my son, and I'm trying to create a legacy for him. And so from that point forward, I would periodically post, and every time I was getting kind of similar big responses. And there were a lot of suggestions of where I should go next. And it eventually got to where it was the grief blog and the page. And at least there I could type something up and just copy and paste. And it's evolved from where it is there to what it is now.
Gotcha, gotcha. And so, I mean, when you say where it is now, I mean, you've got a Facebook group, and you linked me to several other places. Is it primarily Facebook? Is that the more or less the home? Or?
The one I always post to first is the Letters to Zachary on Facebook. But in just talking to people in the community, a lot of them said, well, in today's world, you probably need to be on the other sites. So I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
All right, all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And TikTok, I wasn't real sure about, but the reason why I got in there is because one of the gentlemen I'm connected with said there's a large grief community on there. And so that's kind of why I got on there. I'm still getting adjusted to making those videos.
I mean, I don't have a TikTok, so I feel that very much. I don't especially want to learn how to use it, but at some point I may have to. We just do our thing on here on YouTube. But and so you've been doing this for several months now. You've been engaging. What has kind of come out of that, other than you sharing your story? You kind of alluded in prior conversation that it's evolved a little bit since the inception.
It has. I joke when I tell people this. I originally created the page out of spite. I mean, as funny as that sounds, because I would get in these groups and it was all women, and I love advice from women and all that, but a lot of times, men deal with things differently. A lot of times, and so I wanted at least someone that maybe not exactly, but something similar that could kind of relate. And so in recent years, I've gotten kind of in this mindset, instead of sitting there and complaining about it, do something about it. And so I originally did it just for men, just because men need to have a place where they can feel where they're not being judged or being thrown back in their face, or having their thoughts being thought of less than their female counterpart. And I say this because I've heard these comments before many times from men saying, well, this is why I don't do open up, or this is why I don't, because I know at some point if we get into an argument, it's going to be thrown right back in my face. And so I wanted to do that. And so I did that for a while. And then just with the connections I've made in the grief community, several people said, well, if you want to open it up more to get a bigger following, you're probably going to have to open it up more to more than just men. And so I thought about it for a little while. And so I then, women and basically anybody that's lost a loved one, it doesn't necessarily have to be a child. Because I mean, grief is grief no matter the person that you lose. Some in the community may say, well, it's more difficult to lose a child versus losing, say, someone else. That's up for subject to debate between those people. That I don't differentiate between those. And then last but not least, throughout the 7 months, I've been getting a lot of women that have come up to me say, well, my husband, my boyfriend, my brother, any male in their family is not opening up. How can I get them to open up? So I've kind of, when I've been asked to say, here's what I think that they're thinking, as I've been a male all my life, and this is how I think, and that kind of thing. Here's what I think are some good steps. Now, it's not set in stone, but good steps I think you need to consider when you're talking to your male significant other. And I think I have it on Facebook. It may be buried, but I came up with what I call a male grief constitution. And it's just 10 points. It's not a ton, but just different things for people to look at to go, maybe I did. I don't know if I thought of it that way, or maybe I am thinking of that way. Like I'll give one, like, for example, when you're in a discussion, and this goes for men and women, but I've heard a little more for the female side, unfortunately. Listen to listen, don't listen to respond. Because if you're listening to respond and the man can tell that you're only doing that just to have a comeback, he's going to give you a couple of times. But after those couple of times, if you continue to do that, he's going to shut down. You're not going to get the same response. And so it's just tips like that of, look, this is what you need to think about when you're talking to him.
Right, right. And I mean, as you say, it's a very different process for different individuals, different, male versus female, but also just individual people. And it's you have to figure out the right way to navigate that because, I mean, depending on who they lost and how many losses, maybe they've experienced, it's just going to be a different question. And yeah, I mean, to your point too, I could have sat here and said, and I could have done most of the talking because, my son is special needs, and we've got different things that we could get into, and I could have made this whole show about me, but that would be really rude. So I mean, that's one of the reasons that I like to do podcasts like this, is because I like to listen to people. I like to hear, to hear your story, and to give you the best opportunity to, present your story to, the audience, right? Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it's just there's a level of like social awareness, I guess, involved in that as well. But beyond that, beyond the basic level when it comes to grief. So now, is there anything that you would maybe point to, having been doing this for a while? Obviously, you've got your grief constitution, that you mentioned, but is there anything that you would say is maybe your biggest, I almost want to say takeaway, but your biggest shift in your mind from this? I mean, have you had a different perspective on life over the last 6 7 months?
Certainly. I mean, it's just human nature when you have such a big shift in just life perspective. When some would say maybe if you lost a child, it's more of a shift, say, than maybe a parent, just because, like, my parents are in their 80s. I want them to live as long as possible, but should they pass away in the next couple of years, they've lived 80 years. They've had long, as healthy as possible lives. My son had been 15 for 2 months, had medical issues all of his life. And so, at least in the beginning, there was the typical response from men is anger. That's almost first. And so there was a lot of anger in the beginning, reason why I needed to go back to counseling and to be able to sort through those issues. Um, yeah, there's the biggest shift is, there's, I don't know how universal the quote is. I know I've heard it from a radio guy here in Atlanta. Um, I've gone to ask myself, is it a problem or an inconvenience? Is what I've gone, because if it's inconvenience, you can get around it. If it's a problem, you have to deal with it. And so when I'm out and about in public, it's no fault of the people I'm around, but just listening to some of the superficial thing that just I hear on a daily basis, having to adjust to that and the irritation that it brings me. It's nothing against the people I'm hearing it from. I would never go over them to say anything about it. But personally, I'd be just like, I can't believe you're getting upset about that. That's not a problem. That's an inconvenience. That's, at least early on, I want to go, it would be a problem, say you lost your child like I have, versus you're complaining to someone on the phone about how you've got to take your son or daughter somewhere that you don't want to go, that kind of thing. And so, just what I value has certainly shifted. And it certainly, when you lose someone in your family, it certainly lets you see your mortality. It lets you understand time is, you can have all the money in the world, all the possessions in the world, but the only thing you have a limited amount of is time.
Especially time with people, right? Time with specific people. Yeah. Um, I, man, I just, and of course I can't imagine. I haven't, experienced it. I can't imagine what it's like, but I can see what you're saying. I could see that as a consequence. It's like, okay, is this really that big of a deal? Because you've dealt with some pretty big deals. I think it's fair to say that. There is, are you a Lord of the Rings person? I'm going out on a limb.
I have heard of it, but I'm not a diehard.
Okay, okay. Well, the the reason I ask, there's a scene in the second movie in the trilogy, and of course, the books. I love the books. I'm I'm sure somebody in the comments will tell me that I'm misquoting the books or something, but um, I'm just speaking now for the movie trilogy. In the second film, there's a king Theoden who loses his son, and it gets me every time, even though I haven't gone through that, myself. He says that no parent should have to bury their child, and it's so powerful. I mean, the whole movie trilogy is wonderful, but It just gets me every time, man. It gets me every time because yeah, there's a sort of a natural order to things that you expect. You expect to take care of your parents in their old age. You expect to be there. You expect to be able to raise your kids. And that's unfortunately not true all of the time. And it's again, I've said this before. I just can't imagine what it's like. So, do you think that it's been letters for Zachary? Do you think, or excuse me, letters to Zachary? Do you think that that's been a helpful place for the people that are joining? I mean, do you think that it's going to continue to grow and that it's a
Certainly. Um, I've learned, at least in the short 7 months that I've been doing it, you have growth and then plateaus and growth and plateaus. And like currently right now, I'm kind of in a plateau. I mean, I don't say that to complain. I mean, I'm a little under about 1,000 followers. So, I mean, and to other accounts that may be a lot, but for me to get that many people interested in 7 months, I mean, a little over half a year, it still blows my mind. Um, I would say that the page, I've gotten a lot of really good compliments on the content that I have. Um, I've always I have a hard time like tooting my own horn, if you will, but the comments I get, people seem to resonate with the fact that I can put a lot of difficult situations kind of in layman's terms through simplistic analogies. I've had several pieces I've written from just concepts that I've kind of come up with and seen that they've said, well, wow, that's spot on. That's exactly those kind of terms for that. And so that uh, I do that because, as an educator, my thought is if I can explain it well enough for a kindergartner to understand it, you can certainly understand it. And so that's kind of my thought. Even though I might be wordy in what I'm saying, I still try to make it to where it's as simplistic as possible to reach as big of a group as I can. On a personal level, my wife said this morning to me, she said, I'm so proud of the work that you've done on there. She said, I can see a vast difference from when Zachary first passed away. And she said, you're not as angry. You don't have as many episodes, like just breaking down. She goes, I know we'll always have episodes and we'll always have those moments. But she said, it's been a vast difference from when it happened till now at about 2.25 years out.
I was actually going to that's where I was going to take the conversation next, was to ask about her and how this has been, on her end. So obviously she's supportive of the work, but I mean, is it something she participates in, or is it I mean, I guess it's just an open-ended question.
I'm throughout the entire time of our family, I've always been the open, talkative one. I've always posted on social media. I'm the one that let everybody know when we were in hospital stays. I was always the one tagging locations and explaining what was going on that day on the multiple day stays we were at the hospital. My wife is more quiet about it. She's kind of reserved about it. Um, I'm reserved in the sense that out in public, but in at home, at least during the high time of it, right afterwards, I was very open about it. If it hit me, it just hit me. So she's been really supportive, especially because like my normal weeks right now are Monday, I've got a grief collaboration. Tuesday and Thursday, I've got grief Zooms that I do from people out in like Dallas. And then in between, if I do have a podcast, I do podcasts in between. And so almost literally every day, I'm doing something grief related, whether it's someone else's or mine.
Wow. Wow. So it's really a full-time job then.
It is. And I wouldn't necessarily call it a job per se. I'm not in the sense of a traditional job. Yeah, there are a few moments where I think, well, I kind of need to post because I hadn't posted in a while. But ultimately, those that follow my personal page, I really believe I'm being led to somehow make this a career, i.e., make financial from it somehow. And so, don't get me wrong, I like being in education, but again, with the response I've gotten, I really feel like I've got something, and it's only growing from here. And I mean, I know it's a slow and steady process, but I'm trying to grow and build, and like the young folks say, build the brand.
Well, but it's who you know. It's who you know, not necessarily what you know. And I mean, obviously, with this, there's a component of you have your experience that you have lived through, and that informs your ability to kind of speak on this topic. But that also just getting into the right person's uh, earshot it could be the big leap forward, as far as your ability to monetize that and create a bigger brand out of it, if you will. Do you see yourself doing like public speaking? Do you see yourself hosting things? I mean,
Funny you should say that. I'm one of those people that I'll get on what I would call kicks on doing things, and when I get an idea in my head, I will email everybody under the sun. And so I've had so many people say with my writing and even the couple of podcasts I've done, say, you're well spoken, and I don't mind talking in front of people. And so actually, because I woke up at 4 this morning, as of this morning, I emailed like Toastmasters and Kiwanis clubs in the area. I even submitted something for a TED talk, although I would be shocked if I heard from them.
hey, it's not impossible. It's not
No,
impossible.
it's not. And then there were like grief retreats all over the country. I've emailed from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast of all the ones that were out there to say, and not to just kind of insert myself in there. It was more, hey, my name is so and so. I'm doing this. Do you have any tips? Do you have any suggestions? Anywhere I might be able to get my foot in the door? Here's some of my material. If you like it, I have a lot more that you can look at if you're really interested. And so I'd really like to kind of get on the public speaking market to be able to do that, to at least help out, to kind of get my name out there. And, ultimately, that's kind of my end game. I may publish my letters in a book at some point.
Yeah, self-publishing is a wonderful opportunity. I believe I might have mentioned when we talked before. I'm a self-published author, and I hired a consultant when I was doing that to help me make sure I knew what I was going to do, and how to roll it out and market and do some of these things. But that's been a very excellent move, looking back for our brand, for our agency. And so a book is something that you do once, and it's a lot of work. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a lot. But and I narrated the audiobook for my book, and that took a long time. And not just for me, but for my audio mastering guy who's going to work on this episode after it's done. And there's a lot there. It's a huge investment of time, but you don't have to have the same conversation over and over and over and over and over, every time you go on a podcast, necessarily, when you have a book that tells some of that story. And so it can be kind of a roundabout way of saving some time. But also documentation. It's a brand builder, it's a reputation booster, all those kind of things. I would like to know, though, so other than public speaking, other than maybe publishing a book, do you have any other thoughts for what the future might look like? Is it more social media, or what do you kind of think?
When it comes to social media, and I say this very lighthearted, I don't want the listeners to think otherwise. Sometimes social media can kind of be a love-hate relationship.
Yeah.
I love it because it gets it out to the masses, but I typically want to move faster than what the machine will, because that's how my ADD brain has always worked. I go at about 1,000 miles an hour. And because I'm not some TikTok challenge or something that's going to immediately go viral, it's honestly slow and steady. In this topic, in this arena, it's really word of mouth versus just, something trending on a Twitter trend or a TikTok trend and everybody sees it and wants to do it, that kind of thing. It'll be more social media. I am collaborating with the gentleman on YouTube doing a grief series. It's a male specific grief series because as far as I've seen on YouTube, I've seen very few on there where it's an all male, you know, this is how we see it from our point of view as it relates to emotions and grief and loss and that kind of stuff. So I'm collaborating with him on that. In fact, right before we got on for this, there's a gentleman I did his podcast that he asked me if I wanted to do an excerpt for the book he's doing. And it's me and a group of gentlemen that he wants to get together. And I said, oh, I would love to do it. And I mean, if anything, it could be letters, that kind of thing. Or, I mean, I don't know the specific parameters, but it's still the fact he was just like, hey, I thought of you. Would you like to do it? Yes, I would.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a collaborative book effort can be huge, from what I've heard. I haven't done one, like that myself, but I've definitely heard good things. Now, and I'm sorry, I kind of interrupted you. So, that book, I mean, do you have a timeline or any information? No.
No, I just found out about it. He said, I've got this idea together. I need to talk. He's got some people he talks to because he's written books before. And so I said, just let me know parameters, deadlines, that kind of thing. And, I'll get to, the brain going and see what I can come up with.
Okay. Okay. Now, this is something you've already told me. Okay. But a lot of my listeners, a lot of people who are kind of in my sphere, I guess, if you want to put it that way, know who Connor Boyack is, and the Tuttle Twins book series. And so we talked about this briefly. I couldn't help but ask if you don't mind kind of giving your little, short description of that. I don't want to take up a whole lot of time, but I just thought it was very funny, kind of just because your name is Tuttle, and it's not a name that I've seen outside of the book series. And so, and anyone who doesn't know, that's watching or listening to the show, the Tuttle Twins is a children's book series that teaches economic principles and all these things, and it's wonderful. My son, who's 13, he loves those books, absolutely adores them. And so, yeah, floor is open, Jason. If you would tell that, it's a selfish request, but
Certainly. So when my son was alive, at a certain point, first of all, both my son and daughter are in wheelchairs. And so anybody that has a child in a wheelchair know that at some point you may have to get an adaptive van, essentially a lift to get a child to be able to move them back and forth. Well, the problem that I had was I needed a van for two wheelchairs and not just one. And so those are hard to come by. And typically the vans that have those in there are like your Amazon style van that they don't have just the lift that opens up the back end of the van. It's an actual hydraulic lift, almost like on the back of a delivery truck to lift them into the van. It's those vans are expensive, but the one I had to get was significantly more expensive. And so when I found out the cost of it, where they start about 50K and go vastly up from there. Um, it was my mother that said, have you ever thought about doing a GoFundMe? And I said, yeah, we can start doing that. And so we did that. And I will say that this is the product of 4 years. It wasn't like it happened. I got it out there and all of a sudden within a year, it was done. No, it was over a long period of time. So one of the ways that I decided to raise money was I did it purely social media. I did not call anybody. It was all either Twitter or email. That is it. And so I got out there and basically I got out there and said, hey, look, I've got this GoFundMe. I can't afford this myself. If I could, I would. I wouldn't be asking you. All I'm asking is that you retweet, share this to your following in hopes that someone will see it. And so that's how I got momentum. Well, as I was searching on Twitter, I found the Tuttle twins on there, and it caught my attention because I don't hear my last name too much outside of maybe the North Carolina area or the Midwest. Um, and so I reached out to the gentleman that wrote the series. Didn't hear anything. And a couple of weeks later, I got a direct message from him. He goes, "Hey, I saw your GoFundMe. I'd love to share it and all that." And I'd like to send you something. Can you give me your address? And I said, sure. And it never dawned on me. I was just like, okay, whatever you want to do. And, was very appreciative. I said, you don't have to, but if you want to, here's my address. Well,
Yeah.
about a week later, he sent me his entire book series, not just one. It was like all 15 of them
Right.
or
Right.
something ridiculous. Because when I got it in the mail, I was just like, what am I getting? What is this? And so I opened up, and the first one I saw, I went, oh, I know what this is.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
so, I mean, it's still sitting on my shelf. Now, at the time that we got them, they were a little old for my son and even my daughter at the time. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I still have them, but it was really nice of him to do that. He didn't have to do that. So, yeah, that was a surprise.
Well, thank you. I mean, thank you for humoring me and telling. I just I thought it was a very heartwarming story, and I definitely have been a fan of those books for a while. He has like a history book, a U.S. history book, or I should say they. It's the animator uh, and the author, right? They've worked together, but um, they have a two-part U.S. history. I think there's going to be a third part at some point, and it's wonderful. My son loves the books, and so it's just it's cool to kind of get a chance to talk about that because it's really. I don't anticipate this show will ever get into that territory ever again. You know what I mean? So I appreciate that. Now, I guess kind of winding things down here towards the end, how can people support what you're doing, get involved with what you're doing? And I've got another question after this, but what is the kind of best way to get engaged?
Getting engaged with me would be the actual Facebook page, which is Letters to Zachary, like it's spelled right by my name, on the screenshot.
And we'll link
Um,
it, of course, in the
uh,
video description and everything.
Certainly. I am literally on there, whether I'm at work or not, multiple times a day. I am. If you want to message me on that page, if you've got a grief issue or you want to reach out because of an issue, maybe to you or your significant other, I'm usually within less than a 5 minute response time most of the day. Now, if I'm in the middle of something at work, it might be a little longer. Um, they can reach out to me there, on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. It's Letters to the number 2 Zachary. And that's only because I just couldn't get the other name on those other those other platforms. Um, YouTube's a little sparse right now because I just started it, so I've only got like 3 videos on there. TikTok, I'm getting better just because I can do short videos on there, and like anywhere from a minute to 10 minutes on there. And so I'm starting to get some momentum there. And typically on like TikTok, if I get a response to my video, I'll actually, those that know TikTok, you can take the response and put it up in the corner of the video in your response. And I mean, I'll live response back to them. And so anybody that responds on one of my videos, just know I could respond live to you, especially if I see it in the moment. But the goal of this page is to at least provide a sense of community specifically for men, but anybody can join, and I will welcome anybody to come in there and just to read the content I have. Hopefully you can relate to it. Something will resonate with you with that content. um, I'd like to get to a point where I can get out in person and like we spoke earlier, publicly speak and get out in the public to say, hey, whether you think what no matter what your situation, I'm an example. I'm doing this, you know, my blunt response to it is, I don't care what other people are thinking. I'm doing this to show you it can be done. And I mean that in a nice way, just because don't see a ton of men doing this per se. And I know there's a lot out there that could probably use this, or definitely could use this, that may go, well, I need someone to talk to, and I can't find anybody. And so that's the ultimate goal, outside of just, the typical stuff a lot of us brand creators want to do, the getting to be known and making a career out of it, and taught books and all that stuff. Yeah.
Sure, sure. If you and so I guess my last question I alluded to. I mentioned to you before, we're a life insurance agency. We're a financial for services firm. My book talks about life insurance, talks about money and all these things. And the uh, the fact of the matter is, we deal with a lot of this type of conversation, not necessarily post grief, but pre grief in a sense, right? It's what there's a bad rap that life insurance agents have, which is that they're selling death, right? We're talking about, well, if you pass away, blah blah blah, but people do pass away, and I don't like the idea of selling death, and we don't do that. That's not a an angle that I've ever enjoyed considering, but it's okay, is there a tool that can benefit your life now and also provide if the worst should occur? Yes, there is such a tool. And so that's what we're, about. It's getting both sides of that benefit. The maybe if and also the definitely when, side. And so this is something that over a long enough timeline, everybody that we work with is going to have to, deal with. Their family is going to have to deal with. And so, with that in mind, I know it's a long intro for a question, but do you have maybe like one or two things, if you could know one thing going into, the experience that you've had, if you could have already had one thing that you like had committed to your memory, if you knew one thing to deal with some of those emotions, before this all happened, if there's just any advice you could give, to someone that's dealing with a situation like that or might in the near future, do you have anything like that?
Um, Unfortunately, when it comes to grief, honestly, nothing can prepare you. You can talk about it all you want, but until the actual emotion hits you like a Mack truck, like it does all of us, there's just, you know, in the beginning of this grief process, I had a lot of problem with feeling like other people may not care per se, but as time has gone on, I've changed my thought process in the sense of, well, they don't necessarily understand because they're not being forced to deal with it. And grief and death and all that is, you won't know it until you're in the middle of it. Unfortunately, that's just the way it goes. And so since then, I've kind of changed my thought process as it relates to that. People come up and do what they think is appropriate and what they think is right. Now, you will have from time to time people come up and make ignorant statements and all that, and that's across the board from anybody I've talked to. There are people that are insensitive and all that. You're going to deal with that, but the genuine people, they try their best to put themselves in your shoes, although they can't necessarily because they're not in the middle of it. So, I would just tell people, unfortunately, it's just difficult. The quote that I constantly hear in the grief life is, the only way to deal with grief is to grieve, period. And so I would say that. The other thing I would say, as it kind of ties into what you do, the best decision that we ever made through my wife's company was, it was just out of the blue. We went, let's get a life insurance policy for our son. She was working for a major company at the time. It was pennies on the dollar. It was like 20K or something like that we could get for like $5 a month or something ridiculous. And we're so thankful that we did it. And I don't know about other companies, but the major company that she works for, that I won't say the name, but they deliver everybody's packages everywhere, that you will know who they are. Um, that was the easiest process ever. Literally, the day that we announced it to the company, that afternoon the agent called us. We said, do you need a copy of the death certificate? Because we had it at that point. She goes, no. She said, do you have the link to his obituary in your local paper? Yes. We sent it to her. The next day we got a check cut. I mean, it was that fast. And so, as it relates to funeral expenses, I, I don't mind saying what I spent on it, just because for those that don't understand, we went with a basic kind of like art. They had either packages or you could do it a la carte at the funeral home. We went with a basic package. We added a little bit more to it. We had our son cremated, which was the cheaper of the two choices, and it ran us almost $9,000. And so that, I know people say that, well, we know funerals are expensive. Well, I did that 2 years ago before all this inflation hit.
Right.
And
Right.
that would be one thing I want to, at least as it relates to your end and what you do. It, you may not think about it, but in the moment, you don't want to have to think, well, now how am I going to have to pay for a $10,000 funeral, $10,000 plus funeral in my worst moment of my life? And so we were so thankful that we had that.
Yeah, I mean, that goes, I mean, there's I once upon a time I did car insurance claims for a brief period. I really did not enjoy that line of work. But you could tell it's a big relief when somebody has, say, like rental car coverage, because then their entire ability to like live their life is not completely upended because their car is totaled, or something like that. And so, that protection products, which I don't necessarily like that term, but protection products, I mean, they have a place. They you'd be glad you have them if something occurs. Hopefully, nothing occurs, but that's the whole thing. If it happened to everybody, they wouldn't be able to write insurance policies because it would be too expensive. So, and I won't go off on my soapboxes and start talking about insurance products. It gets me real fired up, and I do that every day, but the long and short of it is, and I'm glad you said that, you're not a client of mine. It's just a decision that you made. It's through your workplace, workplace, provided insurance option. And a lot of people have those options and don't exercise them. And people who are getting life insurance, we do a lot of whole life insurance. And so a lot of permanent life insurance products, they have options for children's insurance. And there's not really a lot of underwriting involved with that. You just can say, yeah, sure, I'll pay a few extra dollars to have, some benefit available if something happens. And a lot of people don't use those. They think, oh, well, I'll just keep my costs down. Well, there's a pro and a con there, and you have to decide, how to balance those things out. So,
Yeah,
um,
you'll either pay for it now or pay for it later, but you're going to pay for it.
right, right. I mean, as with everything, that's how life is, I guess. But Jason, I just appreciate you, going through this. It's not something. Again, I know I said this, but it's not something I can appreciate, from your standpoint. It's something that is so tragic and powerful, and I don't. All I can do is listen and just try to get your perspective as best I can as a non-experiencer of this situation. But I appreciate you being willing to do that, and being at a point and going through all this, and sitting down and sharing that message, because it is a message that a lot of people need to hear, and it is something that people need to know is a possibility, right? My own son, he's autistic. And so, there's certain things that are higher risk, right, in his situation. And so it's like it just changes your perception on things. Um, so again, I'll kind of reel myself in because we could just talk about this all day. It could easily be a 3-hour podcast, and I won't do that to you. But is there anything that I didn't ask you that you would like to say, or any closing thoughts or comments?
Certainly. I'm in my personal life, I'm pretty much a straight shooter. I mean, I told you in our pre-meeting that I'm pretty straightforward. I don't sugarcoat a whole lot. But you know, nobody makes it out of this life alive. I mean, that's the old saying, but there's no truer statement out there. We all will meet the same essential end, is what will happen. And so, whether you're grieving or someone you know that's grieving, there will be grief somewhere. Um, the thing I would leave with as it relates to men and grief, the irony of all of this is men are a creature that never like being told what to do, no matter whether you're alpha male, beta male, whatever you want to call yourself. No man likes being told what to do. So the irony of men not opening up because someone doesn't want them to just baffles my brain. It really does. I have said many times before, and I will say it again. Don't be concerned about what other people think about your emotions and your mental health, because you have to deal with it. You've got to figure out a way to get through life with it. Uh, I have to deal with this grief on top of my depression, on top of my anxiety, on top of my ADD, on plus all my kids' issues. And so don't be concerned necessarily, especially someone on the internet. Statement I always end with is, do you realize how many ignorant statements there are on the internet on a daily basis? Why are you concerned with them? You know, and so if you need a place, Letters to Zachary is there. If maybe I don't do it for you, I know on several other men I can direct you to, or women if you feel more comfortable to talk to them. I know a lot of people. The only thing I ask is that you just reach out. Period.
Well, there you go. I mean, so the moral of the story is, don't try to do it by yourself. So, Jason, thank you for all of that. I appreciate this. It's a nice long, conversation. We really got to get into some things that I'm glad that we did. And, who knows, maybe we'll have another episode when you have your book published, something like that. I'd be happy to have you back on. And, in the meantime, all the links for everything that we talked about is going to be right below this video here on the YouTube channel. And, if there is anything that we can do to help facilitate, here at Perfect Spiral Capital, please reach out to us, and please reach out to Jason, because I think he's doing some really incredible stuff. So, again, thanks everybody for tuning in. We will see you on the next episode. This has been The Price of Time. Thank you so much for listening to The Price of Time, hosted by Luke Tatum. Subscribe to us for more episodes. Check the description box below to learn more about our guest. And if you found this episode valuable, please share it with a friend.